G'day Dons fans and welcome back to Don the Stat. ANZAC Day started with hope. For a half of football, Essendon competed and stayed in the fight. Then came the second half. Collingwood's class, composure and experience took over, and what had been a contest turned into a 77-point reality check. It was another reminder that in 2026, the gap between being competitive and being constantly good is still a sizable one. And now, just when you might hope for a softer landing, the Bombers return to Marvel Stadium to face back-to-back premiers, the Brisbane Lions. I'm Jonathan Walsh, and joining me as always is my co-host Ian Hume. Humey, it was another bruising result. The challenge level somehow goes up again this week, but maybe that's the sort of test this group needs. How are you feeling 5 days on from ANZAC Day?
Hey there, Jono. Good to see you. And look, I'm still pretty disappointed we couldn't put forward a better contest across the day. It's just one of those games where everything started to go wrong. Like, it just cascaded. It's obviously a fantastic day to be a part of. ANZAC Day, I only wish we could win one for a change. It feels almost a generation ago that we did win one. I know it was only 6 years, but that does feel quite a long time. And as you say, it doesn't get any easier this week coming up against the reigning premiers. But it's also a great challenge for our young group to measure themselves against the best. How are you doing there, mate?
Yeah, I'm okay. Like you and every Essendon fan, obviously disappointed. I think as the week's gone on and I've sort of thought through it, and yeah, it doesn't make the result any easier, but you kind of understand how we got to where we did, given the respective teams. We'll jump into it a little bit further on, but I don't think we necessarily set up in a way that gave us our best opportunity. But I think the great thing about getting exposed to these big games is you start to learn about, who's up for it and who's not. And I think we probably were reminded of some things that we already knew, potentially about some of our more experienced or senior players. But then we saw some young players who were able to really step up and take their opportunity and put in a good effort too. So I think that's what I take out of the game ultimately is that we found some young players who, some we knew about, Caddy and Kako, some Day-Wicks, for example, we weren't so sure about. We're starting to see that we've got some young players who are, capable of performing on the big stage, and that's the bit that helped me get to sleep at night.
Yes. The small wins really, isn't it, at the moment? You're sort of looking for the small flowers in the patch full of weeds, or the small break in the clouds. Don't want to be too depressing, but yeah, you're looking for those green shoots there. Before we do get on to tonight's show, as always, like to acknowledge those who have signed up to the Patreon this week, and that is Joel Harris and Aaron Webb, who have joined us in the Patreon community. Also want to give a big shout out to everyone who came along to the Founders Bar pre-game drinks before the ANZAC Day game. I think it was the biggest turnout we've had. There was a photo taken probably about 45 minutes before the match, and you could barely fit everyone in the frame, and then people were still showing up even after the photo was taken. It was such a great vibe to see everyone. Obviously, the game didn't play out as positively as we were thinking prior to the game, but it's still great to see everyone and have those special connections that we've forged there. And I do want to give a special shout out to Gail from WA. She's been a supporter of the show since day dot. It was so great to finally meet you in person. Gail, you've been on a couple of the live Q&As, but great to actually see you in person.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. I actually felt overwhelmed when I walked in there a little bit after that photo was taken. So thankfully I missed out on that. It's not my forte, but yeah, great to meet Gail and everybody else. There was a ton of people there, and I think we might need to find a bigger venue pretty soon, Matt.
I think maybe we'll have to take over the president's lunchroom. I think that might be enough space for us. Also want to give a big acknowledgement to your interview that Rick Edwards conducted with you over on his Patreon. It was a great deep dive into your time at Essendon, and even I learned a new thing or two, having known you for over a decade and done this show with you for we're into our 5th year now. So it really just shows how good an interviewer Rick is. Obviously, Rick's been a big supporter of ours for a long time. So if you're listening to this, make sure you check out the interview on his Patreon and all the other great training and draft content he's putting out over there.
Yeah, for sure, mate. Some people might find this a little bit hard to believe, but talking about myself isn't something I'm overly comfortable with. But Rick did make it easy. He's a real pro, and he was well researched. He reminded me of things that I'd said and done that even I didn't remember, and yeah, it made me feel really, really comfortable. So yeah, thanks, Rick. He made it really easy, and hopefully people enjoyed listening to it
as they should. Look, before we do get into the review, just one more thing. I've been really disturbed with some of the language that's being used to talk about Ben McKay in the fan community. This hasn't been helped by the media endlessly highlighting every mistake the blokes make, but some of the ways in which he's being discussed on fan sites, not on our Patreon, but on some of the Facebook pages and Twitter and Instagram and the like. I think it's quite distressing the way in which we're talking about these people. I think we should be better than that in the way that we talk about players. I know that we're all frustrated with the results, and I know that there are moments in games where people don't perform at their best, but it just worries me the damage that this could do to individuals if they do see it. Yeah, I just wanted to say something because I don't think you can question the output. I just think the way in which it's being done is concerning.
Yeah, he seems like an easy go-to these days. I don't think any player is beyond criticism for a poor performance, and I don't think Ben played anywhere near the football he's capable of on Saturday. But it does seem that every time he has or Essendon has a bad performance, he gets isolated and picked out. And look, I guess in part that comes with the territory of the big contract, and to an extent he probably expected that might come. But yeah, I think you could complete that exercise each week on most players. I saw Caddy's opponent give up the chase on him a couple of times on Saturday, but we weren't good enough to take advantage of that. And, there were times when Nate was well on his own, but that doesn't get isolated. We also don't, unfortunately, as fans, have access to the behind the goals footage, because I'd like to pick it out and show it, not to bring criticism to the opponents, but also more so just to educate people that whilst not defending some of the poorer parts of Ben's game, some of what gets highlighted is, most defenders in the competition are guilty of from time to time. Hopefully Ben can prove the doubters wrong and get back to the footy he played. The Hawthorn game, I thought he was our best player. He was really, really good against the Ds as well, which is no surprise. Defending gets a lot easier when your team's giving a lot more pressure around the contest. But I think sometimes kindness goes out the window, doesn't it? And that's a bit disappointing. But yeah, should we move on to the review, mate?
Yeah, look, I guess that's enough faffing about ignoring the elephant in the room. We'll finally cut to the chase and analyse the ANZAC Day clash. And to me, it felt a lot like the Hawthorn game. We sort of built up and went in with hope. We were competitive for a time in the game, and then we were completely broken apart, although this time there wasn't the small recovery in the fourth quarter. Or the Pies really, buried us, whereas I think the Hawks probably took the foot off the gas a little bit in that game. It's all well and good to talk about being young and experienced compared to the Pies, and that certainly played a part in terms of the way in which the teams handled the pressure and structured up on the day. But there's just elements of the way in which we collapsed in that second half that is really concerning.
Yeah, I think that's right. We were probably lucky to be as close as we were at halftime, weren't we? The Pies kicked 4 behinds in a row at one point in the second, although none of those were gimmies, but we've played in games before against the Pies where they seemingly haven't been able to miss. And then Caddy comes out, kicks the first to the third, that really good sort of solo effort, margins 9 points, and then 10 or 11 minutes later it's out to 34. And it's kind of hands on hips, head down, and all parts of our game really fell apart from there, which is, as you said, really disappointing. We turn the ball over in our defensive 50. They get a goal, goes back to the centre bounce. They get another, then heads drop. Peter Wright misses a shot from long range, a set shot as well. We had plenty of time to set up, but we allowed them to transition from that kick in really easy, and they get a goal from it, and then they get it behind from the next centre bounce, and then we turn over the kick in and get another goal, or the Pies get another goal. So yeah, it just felt that we sort of grinded and stuck with them, but couldn't really be clean enough or find a way to be able to hit the scoreboard. We kept it close for a while, but once they opened up, we really did drop our heads, and it sort of fell away from there, didn't it? And yeah, that was really disappointing to see.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to say that we lost it at selection, but the construction of the side didn't help. We spoke about in the preview that as good as it was to get Dyson Sharp into the side to play in the occasion, it meant we were essentially running with all these midfielder types at half forward. And then we went and played Giles Caldwell, predominantly at half forward compared to in the middle. Sort of forced Tom Edwards up to the wing. We pushed Sam Durham back into the midfield rotations after he'd shown really good form as a predominant half forward. So, I think the last couple of weeks have sort of praised the positional moves that have come off, but here I think we've missed a trick with the choices that were made, and ultimately it made it a lot more difficult for us to compete in the game.
Yeah, it's hard to work out. We clearly prioritised exposing our top draftees to what is a bit of a cauldron on Anzac Day over a team balance. And look, I get that in many ways is what this year is all about. So I think for Dyson and then Jacob Farrow and also Sullivan Roby, our three first round draft picks from last year. For them to come in and play in front of 80,000 people for the first time, or 90,000 people for the first time, is a great experience for them. So I get doing that. But how we set up was particularly confusing. I'm not sure how fit Jay Caldwell was or wasn't. I do think there's enough of a sample size in years gone by, at least to my eye, that he's not particularly adept at playing that half-forward role. I think for the most part, he was coming up and playing around the footy. And so he didn't really play as a forward. He was playing more as an extra midfielder. But that gave Collingwood a spare behind the ball, and that's exactly what they would have wanted, to be able to set up that way. And I think Jai has shown when he's been playing in that role that he's not great at reacting to the traffic coming behind him and being able to pick up a man on the way through. So, yeah, I don't think that was a great move. And then conversely, I'm not sure Sam Durham is great at the 360-degree requirements of playing midfield. I think he prefers to see the game in front of him and then track the ball back that way. So I think in both cases, we had those two reversed and not playing them to their strengths and exposing their weaknesses. And then I think also for a team that, and Brad Scott's talked about it, the lack of continuity we've had in recent years because of injuries and player unavailabilities. So to then move Tom Edwards out of the forward line and play him on a wing when we were starting to see a little bit of improvement with our forward mix and creating space for one another and leading patterns, ball retention inside 50, to take him out of that was quite strange. So, yeah, we had players out of position, we had handovers, we had an opponent that's incredibly well drilled. It really felt to me that we played into their hands with how we set up. And I don't expect any of those alone were a reason we lost the game, but I'm not sure it set us up for success either.
Yeah. I think probably the thing that one of the big factors in costing us the game was something we've spoken about a lot over the years, is the problems you have when players don't trust each other to either win the ball or defend their opponent, and how that causes the rest of the game to fall down. Because if you're not trusting your teammate to win the ball or stop the opposition who has the ball, you're moving out of your position to try and impact the play, but then you're allowing the opposition space and time and be able to get dangerous. And I think we really got a masterclass watching Collingwood from players like Pendlebury and De Goey and how good things look when you can trust your teammates to win the ball or defend opposition ball movement, because it allowed them to sag off the contest in dangerous positions where they could be impactful. You can refer to it as cheating, that they're not going in to win the hard ball, but they're setting themselves up to be dangerous when they do it, and they're trusting their teammates to do it. And we obviously saw the results of that on Saturday. Meanwhile, we were once again beasts of the honeypot, 2 or 3 players constantly going for the same ball and not impacting. And even with the increased numbers around the ball, as you say, with Jai pushing up from half forward, we really couldn't take advantage. So we were down 31 in contested possessions and 20 in ground ball gets. It was, it's for an area of the game we thought we could get an advantage in, given the form of the previous weeks. It was really disappointing that once again we sort of reverted to that type.
Yeah, they had 33 more contested possessions, and this is the team that went into that game, Collingwood, that ranked 18th for contested ball and 44 more uncontested marks than we had. And you're right, our contest work just collapsed in on itself. When we did win it, we were too close to be effective. We didn't have outlets on the outside, and then often had to kick to their loose behind the ball. They had 15 more intercepts for the game, and then they just used that to then control possession and control field position. So it was either they won a clearance, went forward and held it in their end, we couldn't transition it out, or on the occasions that we did win it, they had a spare behind the footy and were able to use that to manipulate transition for themselves. Yeah, it just felt like a combination of how we set up, but then also that lack of trust to falling away around the contest meant that we just gave them everything that they wanted. When you have as much experience and class as guys like Pendlebury and De Goey, and in De Goey's case, I mean class on the field, not off it, it's going to get ugly, and that's exactly the way it played out.
Yeah, and people want to question the game plan and the way we want to play the game, and it's been constant in the media, but a game plan is only as good if you can execute it. And there were multiple times where we did look like we were going to break free of congestion, and we'd done the hard work, we got the ball, and we were in the process, and you could sort of see playing out in front of you, if the possessions go the way they should in terms of handballs and kicks, that we'd be out. But too often we couldn't execute that one-touch play. There were a lot of fumbles or missed targets. There was a lot of people sitting back on their heels waiting for the ball to come to them, when clean disposal and intent to get the ball would have meant that we would have been clear and actually be able to push forward. So there's a lot of times when we were coming out of the back line and we were trying to exit a clearance, And it was just that missed handball or that, that 2 touches instead of a 1-touch pickup. That meant we couldn't get it. You couldn't get it to the next player in the chain. We'd lose it, it'd turn over and go back down Collingwood's end. They're much cleaner with the ball. So it really can't just be the occasion we were playing on. We've been doing it a lot this year and in previous years. And it's one of the things that if we can clean up, suddenly the game plan, which people are concerned about, looks a lot better.
Yeah, look, I do think, again, it's a byproduct of just being too close to the contest and losing that shape. As we say, bees to the honeypot. It makes it hard to clear the contested area. It invites an extra handball because the only options you got are guys standing right next to you or right in front of you without really getting anywhere. And then when we did break clear again, we players look up and they see a Collingwood +1, with our smartest forward playing out on a wing. So I think that just all added up to what we saw. And I think that's not so much game plan. I think it's some tactical errors in how we set up, but then player execution to fall in on themselves in and around the contest. And along the way, there were a lot of fumbles and missed handballs and poor kicks that hurt as well. So I think it was a shared responsibility for me on player execution and then coaches, at least from outside looking in, tactically just not getting it right on the day.
Yeah, I think we've seen so far this year in the games that Essendon have played that we are really relying on the centre bounce working for us in order to be competitive. The 2 games where we've won over 40% of the centre bounce contest this year has been the Demons and the Suns games, and they're our 2 best games of the year. But we struggle there. We find it really challenging to play without the territory. As much as the makeup the midfielders there went away from what had worked in the previous 2 weeks, I really think it was the ruck contest itself where the Pies really got the dominance. Last 2 weeks, Peter Wright has been able to play as that number 1 ruckman, but he's been going up against players like Gordon and Witts, who, as good as both of them are, they're not leapers. They're really good in other aspects of the ruck, although Witts has really dropped off this year under the new ruck rules. But Cameron and Steen were able to jump over him and get first use. So one of the reasons the Pies were so effective was that the Pies were able to get hit-outs to advantage that their midfielders could run straight onto. So this is more than just at centre bounce, but it was 14 hit-outs to advantage for the Pies to 4 across the game. And I'm thinking, particularly in that third quarter when they were well on top, with Steen or Cameron would be leaping over our ruckman, the ball would go into space and there'd be a Collingwood player streaming onto it. It was because they were getting such clean use of the ball from the ruck. This really hurts us in the centre bounce because, as much as we would struggle to kick a goal after a period of hard work, and this is across the entire game, more often than not, after we kicked a goal, Collingwood's winning the next centre clearance and cleanly and getting it deep into their forward line. So it made it really hard to build any momentum in the game because we weren't being able to build on the hard work that we had done.
Yeah, look, it's becoming increasingly important across the competition, mate, centre clearance for territory, for momentum, for maintaining and breaking it. We've spoken about the moments where, 1 goal becomes 2 because the Pies are able to get a clear clearance. We didn't give ourselves the opportunity to build momentum in the game because we weren't winning that. There's only 1 team in the top 6 on the ladder at the moment that don't have a positive centre clearance differential, and that's Hawthorn. And yeah, it's been a big theme in those 3 games we've lost by a considerable margin, and that's a lack of a contest in the ruck and then poor shape at contests. And I don't know what's the chicken and the egg here. Is the lack of ruck contest causing a lack of shape in and around the footy, or is it just those 2 things happening independently of one another? But yeah, we lose shape, we lose contested ball, we lose control on the outside, and we did do a better job around stoppage clearance. We won those clearances 19-9, and outscored them 3-2 to 1-3, but we lost centre clearance 20-9 and were outscored 4-2 and 4-2 to 0. So yeah, just far too often we were having to start the game from deep in our own defensive 50. That's if they didn't go forward and score.
Yeah. Look, to sort of wrap up the Collingwood game, a common refrain on Donastat up there with take what the opposition gives you, and indeed, shout out to those playing the drinking game, I think that's the first time I've said it tonight, is that things are not always as good as they seem or as bad as they seem. And even in a game like that where the result was so one-sided, there were certainly positives to take away, although mostly in the performance of individuals. I think we touched on this in our Patreon First Thoughts, but Saad El-Hawli played his most complete AFL game. He was really good defensively on Elliott. Now, Elliott still got shots at goal off. One was from a pretty soft free kick, but given the weight of territory the Pies had, that's to be expected. But I thought, especially from the position I was watching in, El-Hawli was really good with his defensive positioning. which hasn't always been his strength. And then he was one of the few players who was really trained to take on the pie zone. Archer Day-Wicks show that he can be a big game player, even if he still has patches of games where he goes missing. I don't think he's ever going to be a star of the competition, but I look at his skill set and how he played in that game, and he strikes me as the sort of player that other teams' fans don't think of until they're playing in a grand final and they're suddenly bobbing up and kicking 2 or 3 goals. You know, I sort of think what Kai Lohman did a couple of years back in Brisbane's first premiership. Then Caddy is so close to a breakout game. I mean, how different would the match have played if he converted in that opening quarter? But, you know, he's going at 2 goals a game. He had 6 scoring shots on the weekend in a game where he barely got any service because Collingwood doubled our inside 50 numbers. Again, he's right on the cusp of a breakout, and I think it's just around the corner.
Yeah, I think whenever we lose, there's a lot of justified complaints or moaning about the performance of our senior players. But, you know, I think we knew that was a problem already, because if it wasn't a problem, we wouldn't have needed to clear some of the players that we've cleared and go to the draft to rebuild. And so in these games, I'm looking at how our young players perform and stand up. I think, you know, Saad El-Hawli was drafted because of his pace, his ability to break the lines and do some damage with ball in hand. And he's worked really hard on his defensive game and his contest work. And for a long time, we've lamented the lack of player development at the club. And for me, he's a great shining light example of getting that right. He kept Elliott to 2 goals. One was from a pretty soft free. He's a player that's, you know, tormented us for years. So, yeah, I thought defensively he did a really good job. Beyond that, he also had the most intercepts on the ground. So he was able to read the ball in the air and intercept, and then had the conviction to run off a really dangerous forward and try and create. And you know, he was probably the one for us right to the very last siren who was still trying to create something and you know, try and get some positivity out of the game. And then in the moments where we did look to mount a challenge, it was Caddy, Kako and Day-Wicks that did it. All 3 showed to me that they like the big moments and that they have match-winning abilities. We didn't walk away from that game without gaining plenty from it. I don't think, didn't Day-Wicks just love the moments in the first quarter? Yeah, when the crowd was up and about and loud, he wanted to take the responsibility to take those shots, and he took his chances. Yeah, I think we still got some wins out of the game despite what the scoreboard showed. But yeah, should we move on from that one, mate, and take a look at the news of the week?
Yes, and we'll start with another Barrett Award nomination. They always seem to appear in weeks that we lose, which isn't surprising. And it was actually going to be our first former Essendon player turned media figure nomination for the Barrett Award this week. But we have had a latecomer swoop in to take this week's nomination. And just like our upcoming opponents on Saturday, this week's nominee has gone back-to-back as Tom Morris once again gets the chocolates after he breathlessly stated that Brad Scott has to meet certain metrics to be coaching next year. Now, I don't know about you, Jono, and the work that you do, but I think in my job, I need to meet certain metrics to keep my job. I imagine you do too. And somehow Morris believes that his revelation somehow contradicted what Andrew Welsh has said last week, because he's come down from the mount with the tablets with the actual truth, despite what Welsh said, which I think you'll talk about right here.
Yeah, look, I think you can hand out the award now, mate. I don't think Damien Barrett himself can win from here. Yeah, Andrew Welsh gave that interview to both the main print papers a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, spoke about the fact that there's KPIs in place for the football department and the senior coach that are beyond just wins and losses. So yeah, Tom somehow manages to spin it into exclusive breaking news. It's like he had a newspaper land on his desk 3 weeks late and managed to pretend that he was the first one reading it. It was pretty incredible stuff.
Look, moving on to the injury front, it is so disappointing to see Isaac Kako go down with a stress fracture in his back. Seems like it's going to be at least a month before we see him back, and in all likelihood longer. He just adds so much to the side, his creativity and expression, and I just not motivation, but the way in which when he gets he's one of those players that when he gets near the ball, people get excited. And I think that's not just the fans. I think that is his teammates, because he's so creative as well. And once again, we're really being denied that. And he seemed all set up for a really strong year. He had that injury at the beginning of the year, causing him to miss the first week. And he was sort of just getting back into being a really dangerous player. But again, he's disappointed that he will miss some time. He is only in his second year, but he does feel like someone who's been around for a long time. He's just fitted in so seamlessly. A silver lining is that we do have a few young small forwards who are performing at VFL level, so it'll be great to see them get their opportunity, although none of them have the full package that ANZAC has.
Yeah, it's disappointing, as you said. We managed the Sullivan-Roby injury well, which from what I understand was quite similar. Got him back playing relatively quickly. So let's hope it's the same with ANZAC. He's carried a big load, hasn't he? He's played almost every game, I think, bar one since debut. So, yeah, that's a lot of footy for a young guy. And, yeah, we ultimately want him back playing games with our other young forwards to build that continuity. So, yeah, hopefully he's not out for too long. And more importantly, hopefully it's not something that slows him down long term. We want to make sure that we get that right. And when he does come back, he's back for good.
Yeah. Better news with regards to Archie May, who was suspected of having an MCL injury following the Collingwood game, but has avoided serious injury. He's out for this week, but given how much improved he's been so far this year and really sort of taken that, deepest forward spot in the team for now, it's good to see that he'll be back fairly quickly. Mason Redman, in good news, is also back in the VFL this week. You'd expect to see him back in the senior side quite shortly, whilst Killian Burke will make his VFL debut after his long-term injury. It's hard to constantly have new injuries popping up, but at least this year compared to last, the bad injury luck has also been accompanied by good news, whereas last year it seemed to be all bad all the time. It seems like the Tigers have taken our bad injury juju. They can't get a break at the moment, but at least for us, when someone's going out, at least someone's on the way back.
Yeah, look, sounds like Archie will be back next week, which is great. He's an important piece for us, and our forward line functioned better with him, Edwards, and Caddy as the three sort of marking forwards. And good news that Mason's back sooner than expected. I actually like the call that we've made to bring him back via the VFL and not rush him in, given Ridley's out as well. And McGrath's been moved into the midfield. It's a pretty inexperienced backline, but we've held firm. So yeah, it's a good one. Good to see that we've gone that route, I think, and we're backing in these young blokes.
Yeah. Well, look, we're a third way through the season. It's certainly been tougher than what many of us expected, and the results certainly haven't been pretty to look at. But look, you, Jono, you've written an article for the Domsat website where you give your overview of the year so far. And, as is typical of Don the Stat, there's positives amongst the negatives as well there. It's certainly not all doom and gloom, but it's a realistic take on where it is. So I guess just sort of give a bit of a summary of what you wrote in that article.
Yeah, we might put the link in the show notes because it was a bit of a long one. But I think the key point was that, Essendon fans will feel, and rightly so, that we've been more than patient enough. But unfortunately, that patience needs to continue some more. And right now, I do think that impatience is the enemy of progress. Look, it was just to do a little bit of a stock take and a bit of a reminder for myself as much as anything. I wanted to get my own thoughts down. But yeah, we're the third youngest and third least experienced list in the AFL, and we're only just ahead of West Coast and Richmond. And we're seeing what's happening to them on pretty regular basis. Archie Roberts was in game 34 on ANZAC Day. He's only 20 years old, and he was our 11th most experienced player on Saturday. Collingwood's 11th most experienced player was Harry Perriman, who was playing his 100. And then the Pies had another 7 players behind him who'd played 100 games or more. So it's quite staggering, the difference in experience between the two sides. I think the other thing too is, we could have kept someone like Jaden Laverde and might have been better for that, been a little bit more resilient down back, and he might have taken a match up on someone like a Membry or a Jamie Elliott. But then, Saad El-Hawli might not get his opportunity to play that game and show how much he's developed. We could have kept Todd Goldstein. He was keen to go on. But then, if we do that, he probably rucks, Peter Wright doesn't, and then Tom Edwards probably doesn't play. I would have liked to have seen him in the forward line and not on the wing, but we get another game into an inexperienced player. Jake Stringer wanted to stay. He pushed for a longer term deal. We said no. If he's there, Day-Wicks, I would imagine, probably doesn't play, and we wouldn't have got to see what he could do on ANZAC Day. We've also got Redmond, Ridley, and Martin missing. A young list already missing 3 leaders is a big ask, but I think those young guys I just mentioned are the beneficiaries of that as well. And Archie Roberts has really, really stepped up in Mason Redmond's absence. You can kind of draw a real parallel to Archie stepping up and his form going to another level or two since Mason's been out of the side. So, yeah, I think that the key for me out of all of that was to just remind myself more than anything that we could be better than what we are had we continued to go down the path we were on with the list that we had and won more games this year and or at least been more competitive in more of them. But I don't think that would have got us to anywhere where we needed to go or where we wanted to get to. And the path that we're going down is the right one.
Yeah, that's in terms of the list. And again, you always make me feel a little bit better when you put things in that perspective. But you also did a deep dive into some of the numbers. And what are they saying, particularly following, if you sort of wipe those first two games from the season, and they're part of the season, so you should always do that. But I guess for those first two games where we were really poor, what's been happening?
Yeah, I sort of broke the game up into three key areas: clearance, turnover, and transition, and then or sort of ball movement, I guess, for another term to use, and both with and without the ball. And I look more so the last 5 weeks rather than this season as a whole, because I think those first two games, it was obviously quite poor in what we saw, but I think there's been enough change over the last 5 weeks, starting with that game against North, where we started to get a better result from clearance to actually assess our game and where it's heading, a little bit more accurately. I looked at clearance first. We rank 18th for ruck contests over the last 5 weeks, and we were 18th in 2025. So we've actually gone backwards in terms of the number of ruck contests or stoppages in our games, but that's been down across the competition. That's what the rules were designed. The lasso rule in particular was designed to keep the ball in transition more. So that's why we're 17th for hitouts, because it's hard to get a hit out if there's not a ruck contest. And we're also 15th for hitouts or hit out win percentage, which, given we don't have a recognised ruckman at the moment, is to be expected, I would think. We're 17th for clearance wins. Again, hard to get a clearance if you're not having stoppages in the first place. We're 11th for clearance differential, which, isn't too bad. Our games don't generate a lot of stoppage, as I said, and that is a common trait in young teams. We've had a differential of minus 1.8 per game over the last 5 weeks. It was minus 1.2 in 2025. So it's drifted a little bit, but not too far removed. But as I said, we don't have a recognised ruckman, and that's making it a challenge. We're minus 4.6 points per game the last 5 weeks from clearance score. Minus 4 of that is from centre bounce. So stoppage scores, we're holding our own. Centre clearance, where we're getting hurt a little bit. And, again, the Collingwood game was a great example of that. But again, no surprise given we don't have a recognised ruck. Port, Collingwood, Western Bulldogs, Richmond and West Coast are all ranked behind us in terms of clearance scores. And it's actually improved slightly. We were minus 4.8 last year per game. But again, you and I have said this a lot. I've been really big on it. Our midfield wasn't where it needed to be. We didn't have the right mix, the right skill set through there, and we needed to develop it. We've gone to the draft and developed for it with Sharp, Roby and Farrow. Those guys just aren't ready. The AFL average for points from turnover was 46.6 in 2025. We conceded 59.3 points a game last season. Only Richmond with 60 points a game was worse. That's increased the AFL average this year because that's the game now. Fewer clearance contests, more transition, more turnover scores. The last 5 weeks, the AFL average has been 50.3 points per game from turnover. We've improved to 56 points per game defending turnover. So, sorry, that's against 56 points a game against us. Defending turnover better than the Western Bulldogs, which is a bit of an indicator of just how much injuries play a part and how hard it is to be competitive with injuries. Or when you're suffering that number of injuries. Carlton, Gold Coast, Richmond and West Coast are all doing worse. So we actually have made some improvements in our ability to defend turnover. We're only about less than a goal a game off the AFL average.
What about going the other way? How about our ability to score off turnover?
Yeah, well, this is where the biggest turnaround for me is, and that's our ability to start to punish the opposition. We were ranked 17th for turnover scores in 2025, just 37 points a game. We've improved that to 48.2 points a game over the last 5 weeks, which is ranked 12th. And we don't want to be the 12th best team. We want to be the first team. But I do think to go from 17th to 12th is a good step forward for this team. And it's worth noting we're not winning more intercepts. We're actually winning 0.7 in a game fewer this year than we were last year. We're just doing a better job at scoring from them. And, that was poor or worse than poor against Collingwood. But the 3 weeks prior to that, we outscored our opponents on turnover. So I do think there's some green shoots there. In 2025, we were the worst team in the comp for moving the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50. and the worst team in the comp for converting a defensive 50 chain into a score. We're 14th and 14th in the AFL in 2025 for retaining the ball when going inside 50. We were also the worst team in the competition for allowing teams to move the ball from D50 to forward 50, and the worst at allowing teams to score from defensive 50 chains. 17th in the AFL for opposition ball retention inside 50. So, yeah, defensively, we were opened up routinely. The last 5 weeks, we're 9th in the AFL, right on the AFL average for moving the ball successfully from D50 to forward 50. 7th in the AFL for defensive 50 chains, converting those into scores, which is better than the AFL average. And 3rd in the AFL for retaining the ball when we go inside 50, which is a huge step forward in ball movement. Without the ball, we've still got a lot of work to do. We're 17th for teams transitioning from D50 to forward 50 and 16th for opposition ball retention once they go inside 50. And disappointingly, Collingwood are 16th for allowing that sort of transition against them, and we weren't able to capitalise that. So, look, there's doom and gloom here if you want to look for it. There's a lot of positives if you want to look for those, particularly in the development of our young players. And I think some green shoots of our ability to move the ball better. As you and I have said a fair bit, I think as we continue to move the ball better and we get better clearance outcomes, I think our defensive game will improve because of it. A long, long way to go, but I do think we finally have a lot to work with, and I'm really keen to see how these young blokes go this week against the reigning premier. So should we have a look at the Lions?
Yes, we shall. And as you say, the Lions came off their 3rd successive grand final in 2025 and won their 2nd premiership on the trot. So far this year, they've won 4 of their 7 games. They're currently sitting in 5th spot on the ladder, with their 3 losses being to the Bulldogs, Sydney and Melbourne.
Yeah, and their wins are against St Kilda at Marvel, Collingwood at the Gabba, North at Gather Round, and the Crows at the Gabba last week. So, yeah, they've sort of had to win some games against some good sides. And, yeah, and they're the reigning premiers for a reason, right? But they're able to win at home and away.
Last year, the Lions averaged 91 points for, whilst giving up 78 per game, and that was ranked 6th for both metrics. So far this year, they're kicking almost 2 goals a game more to be ranked 4th, whilst conceding 86 points per game, ranked 9th. So a little bit up on points against, but in line with the scoring increase in the AFL average, and the improvement in their scoring is above what the AFL has done over the past year. In both years, their territory game has been similar. They're going around +6 inside 50s on their opponents per game. Also, defensive efficiency is the same in both years. They're conceding a score on 47% of entries last year and this year. Their efficiency going forward has improved so far this season. They've jumped from 50% to 55%, which is currently the 2nd best in the competition. They've also shifted their game to be more focused on kicking, going from a kick to handball ratio of 1.69 in 2025 to 1.93 this season. And that latter number, in terms of them kicking the ball, has been similar in both their wins and losses this year. So regardless of whether the result, they've been kicking high amounts.
Yeah, they're ranked 5th in the AFL for moving the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50, so that coast-to-coast ball movement. 8th at converting those defensive 50 chains into a score. We're ranked 6th, as I just touched on. They're ranked 2nd in the AFL for converting a possession chain from any source into a score, which makes for pretty sobering reading, but they do give you a chance to move the footy themselves. They're ranked 16th in the AFL for conceding defensive 50 to forward 50 transition, and 13th for defensive 50 chains being converted into a score. And it is a profile, at least in defending the ground, that's not too dissimilar to Melbourne's.
Yeah. This year, the Lions have really stepped up their centre clearance work. They've gone from just above break even to +3.43 a game, which is the 2nd best in the competition. And they're the best side this year at putting scores on the board from centre clearance as well. They're averaging 18 points per game, which is up 10 from last year. They've also remained the number 1 stoppage clearance side in the comp, averaging 8.5 more stoppage clearances than their opponents this year, but are ranked 7th and 5th from scores from ball up and throw in, respectively. So not quite the same level of scoring power from their clearance dominance, but obviously still really strong. And they're also the number 1 contested possession and ground ball get side this year.
Yeah, ranked 1st in the AFL for centre bounce scores with 18.4 points per game, 3rd in the AFL for generating forward half scores, 12th for scores from defensive half chains. So, yeah, they do a lot of the damage from their own half or from centre bounce. There's only 4 teams in the comp that concede fewer points from centre bounce than the Lions, and only 3 teams that give up fewer points from chains that start in their defensive half. Fremantle, Sydney and Collingwood are those 3. However, they do give up scores from their own forward half, so teams being able to transition against against them. I mentioned those high transition numbers. There's only 3 teams in the competition that concede more points from those coast-to-coast chains than Brisbane. So, yeah, that might be an area for us.
Yeah. Despite our friends at Champion Data continually telling us impossible for teams to play the way the Lions do and win the flag, that the Lions have built that continued premiership success on controlling the ball in the air. Both last year and this year, they've been the number 1 ranked side for mark differential, averaging 32 more marks than opponents this season so far. The one area of the game has dropped off a little bit is their intercepting ability. They've gone from the 5th best to the 13th best, and I think that plays into what you spoke about earlier in terms of their not being able to stop defensive 50 to forward 50 chains as effectively. They're now averaging minus 0.7 intercepts per game this year. That said, when they do win the intercept, they are the 5th best in terms of scoring from intercept, and they're scoring 7 more points than they were last year from this source.
Yeah, they're below the AFL average. We get criticism a lot for average metres gained per disposal, but the Lions are below AFL average in that metric and are ranked 12th. So, yeah, uncontested marks, defending with the ball in hand. This is a team, as I've mentioned, aren't particularly good at preventing teams from moving the ball from defensive 50 to forward 50, which is why part of the reason why they do defend with ball in hand. Yeah, they're ranked 5th in the AFL for defending points on turnover and 5th for themselves for points on turnover themselves. Interestingly enough, they're 18th in the AFL for points from kick-ins.
Look, I think found a few little gaps, but I think for the most part, this is a complete football side. They've got multiple match winners. They've got multiple ways to play, and they've got the tools to handle different scenarios and play styles that they come up against. I'm very jealous of what they've built and hoping that one day we can say the same thing about our side.
Yeah, look, you're right. It's it must be a real privilege to watch this team play every week. If there is a chink in their armour, though, it's that they say it again, that they allow teams to transition the footy from defensive 50, and we've improved our ability to retain the footy when going inside 50. The last 5 weeks, we're ranked 3rd in the AFL for both disposal retention and ball retention going inside 50. So, yeah, look, we're going to need to be able to stop them from scoring at clearance to be able to expose that chink. But, you know, it's an area of weakness, I guess, that they do have that we might be able to expose. Yeah, should we take a look at what they've done in the off-season list-wise, mate? They've made some pretty big changes.
Yeah, so after winning their 2nd successive premiership, the Lions said goodbye to 7 players from their list. Oscar McInerney retired after their flag success, having played 14 games in 2025. Former son Sam Day also retired after 13 games. Brandon Starcevich was traded to West Coast after 14 games, whilst Callum Archie was forced to walk through the pre-season draft to get to Adelaide. He played 26 games last season. Devon Robertson was amongst 3 others delisted. He played 3 games last year. So they got rid of a fair bit of people who had been, you know, decent factors in their premiership year. And obviously, due to the wonders of AFL equalisation, the Lions, having won the premiership, were then able to bring in Oscar Allen from West Coast and Sam Draper as free agents. The pairs played 7 and 6 games respectively so far this year, although Allen's just got an injury that's going to see him out for a period of time. They then matched a bid for Academy player Dan Annable at pick 6. He's played the solitary game. Cody Curtin, who's making his debut this week, was at pick 43. They had 2 later draft picks and then a Cat B rookie in Ben Murphy, who are yet to debut.
Yeah, spot on, mate. Should we take a look at selection? We'll start with us. We've made the 4 changes. 2 of those forced, with Kako and May both out injured, and then we've made the decision to rest Darcy Parish this week, and interestingly also omit Elijah Tsatas. You might have thought that sort of contradicts the decision to leave Darcy out this week. The ins are Gresham, Kondo Giannis, Jaden Ewan, who's been in great form in the VFL and gets rewarded for that. And exciting to see Cox back into the team. It's been 2 years since he played his last game of senior footy.
Yeah. Look, I'm not one usually who gets too worked up over selection, but the Sada submission is a real head scratcher for me. We're coming up against a strong clearance side, arguably the best clearance side in the competition, and we're dropping one of our best performed clearance players in the games that he's played. So hopefully this means we'll get at least to see Sharp given, or someone like Sharp or Day-Wicks or someone else given a bit more midfield time off the back of this. And otherwise, I like that we've brought in 2 small forwards. I think you and I have both spoken about how we want to see a bit more balance in that forward line, and we only went in with the 1 genuine small forward last week in Isaac Kako. So having 2, I think structurally is sound. And I like that Cox obviously is returning after almost 2 years. There's not many players that go before a concussion panel that are able to make their way back. And, he's done a mountain of work to get to this position. And I just hope he's really going to be played in the position he's been doing well in the VFL. I worry that with Kondo back, Langford will go forward, meaning Cox or Edwards will have to push up to the wing.
Yeah, I'm like you. I'm disappointed. I wanted to see more of Elijah, especially with Parrish out of the side. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. His time on ground has been low, and that's interesting. I guess what we don't know is whether that's because that's just the role of being the fourth or fifth midfielder and he's had to wear that. It's not uncommon for that to be the case. Or is it because that's all he's capable of fitness-wise at AFL level? I don't really know, but I might have thought that we could have used his strength of winning clearance this week. The other one I find a little bit peculiar, mate, is the treatment of Jade Gresham. He's been in and out this year. He was I didn't think he deserved to be dropped in the first place. Then he was left out. He didn't play VFL last week because he was the carryover emergency and then comes straight back in without playing a VFL game. If we've moved past him, that's fine. Back into young blokes and leave him out. But to then bring him in without a VFL game, yeah, it's quite strange. Thinking more logically, though, I'm making an assumption here that McGrath and Sharp play midfield just based on the team that we've selected. So that would leave our 7 defenders as McKay, Pryor, Reid, Roberts, Farrow, Saad El-Hawli and Kondo Giannis. It would leave our forward line being Caddy, Cox, Roby, Newen, Gresham, and I would hope Edwards is there. Midfield then of Wright, Merritt, Aldwell, McGrath, Sharp, and then Dersma and Langford on the wings. Blackiston playing that second ruck, and they'll play with 3 talls at various times, so it gives us tall defensive coverage there. Durham and then Day-Wicks, I would expect then play back in those half-forward roles. Look, we never know how the teams might line up because we saw some weird things last week, but if that is how it lines up, then to me, despite the disappointment of Elijah not playing, it's probably the most balanced team I think we've picked in a long, long time.
Yeah, that's what sort of come around to. I still, at a game, feel that the Tsatas decision is not conducive to what we're going up against. But again, I like the team structurally. And just as a side, it is the youngest and least experienced side of the round, even younger than Richmond and the Eagles this game when they're playing over there. So again, huge challenge coming up against the Lions there. They've made 2 changes. We touched on Oscar Allen being out injured and then James Tunstall's been omitted. Ins is Dane Zorko and Cody Curtin, who's making his debut. Curtin is the younger brother of Adelaide's Daniel. He's a 200-centimetre key forward. He's only kicked 2 goals in his 4 VFL games. Obviously, like what they've seen. Zorko is a big in for them, and he's been hugely impressive since he's had his late career transition to halfback. He's exactly the sort of player that we've struggled to contain in previous years, which you would expect that they'll run a lot of their ball movement from the back half through him.
Yeah, you're right. They certainly will. He's a key to their side. I would expect Curtin to play forward. I mean, he is a key forward, so he replaces Oscar Allen. One positional change they've made in recent weeks, the Lions, is to put Gallup down back and play him as a key position defender. They've got Jack Payne out injured at the moment. Noah Answorth, who normally plays across half-back, is out injured. Connor McKenna's kind of come and taken his spot as well, and Jared Berry is out injured too. Darcy Gardner, the other one who can play key back, who's out of that side at the moment too. So yeah, I expect Gallup, despite being named at centre half forward in the selected team, to play back, and then Curtin plays that sort of second, third, tall forward role.
Yeah. Looking at Brisbane's last performance, they had a big win over the Adelaide Crows at the Gabba, 127-75. And other than a couple of minutes in the second quarter, Brisbane led all game. It was tight for the sort of first half or first quarter and a bit, but the Lions had a 7-goal-1 third quarter that really put the match beyond doubt. It was a game where the Lions really dominated territory. They had 21 more inside 50s for the game, and most of this was driven from their stoppage, where they had 13 more stoppage clearances, whilst their ability to win the ball back in the middle of the ground saw them generate 71 points from mid-zone turnovers, so where they won the ball back off the Crows between the arcs compared to the Crows' 26.
Yeah, it was a pretty even first quarter, mate, but the Lions really did put the foot down across the second and third quarters. They kicked 12 goals to 3 across those 2 quarters. They won contested ball by 22 in that period, ground balls by 17, and did damage from stoppage. Centre bounce scores were 4 goals straight to 1 behind, and all 4 of Brisbane's centre bounce goals across those 2 quarters followed immediately after another Brisbane goal. So they were basically getting 2 goals for 1 each time they went forward and kicked a goal.
In terms of individuals, Lachie Neale dominated with 42 disposals, whilst Will Ashcroft had 36 and 13 score involvements. The best on ground, though, was free agent Zach Bailey, really putting on a big audition for probably who is his primary suitor in the Adelaide Crows. He might have added a few $100,000 to the Crows contract offer with that performance. He had 29 disposals, 7 clearances, 3 goals, and 12 score involvements. Charlie Cameron also kicked 4 goals, whilst Logan Morris, Connor McKenna, and Hugh McCluggage each kicked 2.
Yeah, I mean, some great individual performances from them and classic names that we see appear in their best list most weeks. Just on Zach Bailey, hopefully we make it really, really difficult for him to get a kick this week and he decides that it's better to be with us than against us and comes across.
Fingers crossed there. Well, look, let's start by talking about someone our players should know really well in Sam Draper. We're going to be coming up against him in the ruck, and we know we've struggled against leaping rucks. I don't think Sam's quite got the same leap that he's had at his pomp just yet. He seems to be slowly working his way back into his best, but given the struggles that we had last week against Cameron and Steen, that's a big watch there. And the midfield the Lions have is incredibly dangerous. There's not one player. It's not a one-player midfield where you lock down on someone and you can really shut them out. They've just got so many weapons running through there, including those high forwards who have shown that they can go into the middle and impact. So I guess, how are you looking to manage that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the crowd reacts to Sam Draper. He really was a fan favourite, wasn't he? Normally, players get a bit of a boo from the crowd when they play against an old team, and that's probably to be expected. But I think a lot of fans were, yeah, I guess I'm just curious to see how that one plays out. But he's the 22nd ranked ruckman in the AFL this season. Peter Wright is ranked 15th. Take AFL rating metrics for what they are with a bit of a grain of salt, but he's not necessarily, playing the house down, and that might be famous last words. Neither Draper or Fort win a high percentage of hit-outs from ruck contests, both around 37. Blackiston is at 39%, and then Wright is down at 30. So, we're not doing any better, that's for sure. Wright and Draper have similar numbers in terms of converting a hit-out to a first possession and hit-outs resulting in a clearance. So 55% of the time either of them wins a hit-out, their team gets a first possession, and 50% of their hit-outs result in a clearance. So, yeah, no difference there. Wright has kicked 6 goals from 7 games, Draper 4 from 6. Wright and Gawn are actually the 2 highest ranked ruckmen for marks per game this season at 4.3 apiece. Fort's 6 in the AFL for rucks at 3.3 and Draper 9th with 3 a game. So on numbers, they're pretty evenly matched. I think if Peter can bring back that contest focus he had the 2 weeks prior, I think we can handle their ruck situation pretty well. And then in terms of mids, you're right. They've got an even spread. They've got some great players through there. Lachie Neale, I think, though, is still the danger. He's their number 1 clearance player by a bit of a margin. So I think, Dunkley does all the hard work and makes it easy for Lachie Neale. Lachie Neale never really has to worry about an opponent because of the work Josh Dunkley does. But I think he's the matchup that we want for Andy McGrath. If we're going to try and we should try and curtail their clearance dominance and their ability to get forward of clearance and score, then Neale is the one that we need to restrict, and I'd be sending Andy McGrath straight to him.
You touched on clearance there, and last year when we challenged the Lions at the Gabba, it was driven from stoppage against what has been one of the best stoppage teams in the game. And even in last week's loss, we were able to win double the stoppage clearances of Collingwood. We just couldn't take advantage of it. So how do we get back to what worked last year against the Lions so we can turn stoppage dominance into scoreboard pressure?
Yeah, they've made a little bit of a shift with their mids this year, partly due to injury, but Will Ashcroft's been increasing his midfield time because of McCluggage, who got injured in round 1 and then missed a chunk of footy. He's starting to build his midfield minutes now, sort of 3 or 4 weeks back, but he has been playing a little bit more on the outside because of Ashcroft taking up more centre bounce midfield responsibility. They're ranked first for first possession, and first for first possession being converted to clearance at 80%. So whether they win a hit out or not, they're exceptional at getting their hands on the footy first and converting that to a clearance and going forward from that. They're the experts and have been for a long time, mate, at keeping balance at clearance. They have a setup with an inner and an outer layer. They really do have confidence in one another to be able to win their contested one-on-ones at ground level. And I'm not sure we can repeat what happened last year. I'm not normally one to be pessimistic, but I do think that was a bit out of the box and we we were able to get some early confidence in that second quarter from memory, and we just sort of got some momentum from there. And look, I think we have to be a little bit more defensive and set up to limit the damage they did from clearance. And we think back to that first quarter against Melbourne. I think they won centre clearance 6-1, but didn't really get too many fast breakaways from that other than one or two. So I think if we can just focus on limiting the clean exits, then we give ourselves a chance to win the ball back. And if we can do that, they're a team that do allow transition against them. So I think how we set up behind the footy when there's a clearance is as important to how we set up around the clearance itself.
Moving on to Brisbane's forward line, and even with Oscar Allen missing with injury, the Lions do have plenty of firepower up forward, and you've got Charlie Cameron back to his best. I wrote this before we saw the selection with McGrath potentially needing to go back this week, but it's probably less of the case now given the way in which we've chosen the side. So he's a really challenging matchup given what we've got at our disposal. And I guess, how do you handle their fleet of medium-high half forwards? We've talked about half forwards being some of the most important players in the game these days, and the Brisbane have two or three of the very best in the competition.
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone's really truly worked that out, have they? They've got small and medium forwards in spades. So I think Saad El-Hawli did a really good job on Elliott last week. We spoke about it in the Collingwood review. I'd like to just back him in to have a crack at Charlie Cameron. It's going to be a big ask, but he's got the agility to do it. He's getting stronger overhead, Saad. So I think, yeah, it's a good opportunity for him to build on what he did last week as a defender. And, you know, Charlie's not someone who the defensive aspects of the game are natural for him. So Saad can work off Charlie like he did with Jamie Elliott last week. Maybe we get a little bit of drive through that too. But I think ultimately the game is going to start and end at what Brisbane do or we allow them to do at clearance. So, as I said, sending Andy to the source and letting him play a role there on Neil, I think protects our defend or gives us the best chance to protect our defenders by impacting the entrances. And then we do have a number of guys across halfback who have good agility and interceptability. So Farrow, Roberts, Pryor, Kondogiannis, it's raw and inexperienced, but I think if we get some pressure up the ground, once we get it, they do have foot skills to do some real damage the other way. I suspect that's why we've gone with Kondo this week, because his ability to play tall, to take intercept marks, but also him and Farrow combined with Roberts and Pryor can really hurt the opposition or Brisbane with their foot skills, and they're a team that can be transitioned against. So I think that's going to be the plan there, as it should be, is to set up to defend well at clearance, set up to intercept, and then hope we can transition against them.
Yeah. And then finally, our forward structure was a mess last week. How do we fix it given who we've selected?
Yeah, just go back to what's working, mate, or what was working. Day-Wicks and Durham at half forward was working really, really well for us. And for the first time in a long time, we saw some effectiveness across the half forward line. Two small forwards is a good start. So we've got some speed and some tackle pressure and ground ball winners ahead of the ball. So that helps. I think Edwards forward, Langford wing. Cox obviously replaces May. Different player to May. May was playing deep. I think Cox will probably play a little bit higher and we'll look to use Caddy a little bit closer to goal. As I said on when we talked about selection, they're a little bit light for tall defenders at the moment. Gallup has been doing a good job, but Caddy had the better of Harris Andrews last year. They had to move him off him. So if they get some supply, who knows? I think we can score against them if we get enough entries, and that's all going to come down to how effective we can be at limiting their effectiveness from clearance, hopefully getting a bit of clearance ball ourselves, and then going forward from there.
Yeah. Well, moving on to the final thoughts, and it's a bit of a different final thoughts. It's not actually about what's happening on the field, but what's off it, because I'm taking my 3-year-old son, Oscar, to our first Essendon game together. Hopefully he'll have a great day and a memory that will last forever. So I guess for the final thought, Jono, what's the first memory of being at the football that you have, Jono?
Yeah, it's hard. So long ago, and I did start going from a really young age. I think I was sort of 3 or 4 when I started going every week. But the memories aren't so much of particular games, but I just do remember that all the things at Windy Hill. So my granddad used to made a crate out of some timber that he would carry to the game every week. They live just off Keilor Road in North Essendon, so we go to my grandparents' house before the game, catch the tram down to Windy Hill, carry the crate on the tram and I'd stand on that to get a better view of the game. I remember, the Peanut Man walking around the boundary, the cheer squad at halftime carrying the blanket and people throwing coins in it to raise money for the following week's banner. And, being able to go onto the ground and after the game and into the rooms and, the smell of the mud in the centre square because they still had the cricket wicket in those days. So, all of those things are the things that I remember the most from those early days going to the footy at Windy Hill, mate.
Well, here's hoping my youngest can get some great memories for this week. He might not pay that much attention, but we'll see how we go. Well, that will do us for this week. Thanks for all your efforts, Jono, particularly the article in the interview you did with Rick. It has been a big week for you content-wise. Next match preview, we'll be raising the bat for our 100th match preview, so really excited to get into triple figures. Thanks to everyone who listens, who comments, who supports us on Patreon. It remains a fantastic pleasure to be able to bring this show to you and share it with you. Any final words from you, mate?
No, I think you've said it all, mate. Great job. Thanks again to Rick. Thanks to yourself for everything that you've done this week, getting us set up and ready to go and being patient while I was scribbling some last-minute notes and doing some last-minute prep. You definitely held the fort, mate. And more importantly, I think good luck to Oscar. Hopefully he gets to taste a win and enjoys his first game at the footy.
Cheers, mate. That'll do us for this evening. And as always, stay safe and go Dons.